Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 62. I am the show's host, Kyle. I hope everybody liked the last show roundup, just kind of covering all the new stuff going on and all the conflicts overseas. Today's show is going to be more of a foreign events based show, and then Will Porter should be coming on the show on Friday if we could schedule something. Unfortunately, the podcasting and news roundups and everything else I do for the anti-war kind of stuff is all on the side. I gotta work a day job, so sometimes scheduling these interviews and stuff could be kind of difficult, but I do what I can to get done, so I hope I could get Will on. We could have a pretty cool conversation about some serious stuff and some media stuff, and that could be episode number 63. Alright, so if everybody's listening to the show and likes the show, please take a second to share the show. You could go to foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or to my Facebook page, Kyle's Files. Find the show there, click the share button. Thank you so much, and thanks for listening. Now I'll get right into the news. First thing I want to get into today is a story coming out of Reason Magazine about some polling results from the 2016 presidential election. Now, not necessarily the most current events, but I guess as time moves on, people will really have a chance to dig into this data and kind of see maybe what trends they could find in the data that says maybe why Trump beat Hillary in the election. For those of you who can't remember back to October, because it seems like so far away now, everybody was positive that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. Now you hear everybody out saying, oh, I called it, that Trump was going to win the first time I saw him, and all this other stuff. And to a lot of people's credit, I think a lot of people did have that feeling like, hey, this is something really different, so it could be a potential upset. But at the same time, everybody really, the smart money was all on Hillary Clinton leading into the November 8th or 9th election night. And so, I think it's important, I guess, just, to kind of go back and see what happened there. And one of the things that Reason found is that in counties where there were more people who had died, in the military service, died overseas, they were more likely to vote for Trump. Rewind back to October, September 2016 and listen to what Trump and Hillary were both saying and try to kind of look at maybe why Trump would have appealed to people more who were families, friends, or knew somebody who had lost a military service member. Communities where military service members were lost were more likely to vote for Trump. And one thing that Trump was, making the point of was Trump was out on NATO saying that, NATO's outdated and we don't necessarily have to be committed to NATO. And so when comparative to the data on, number of people who die overseas and where they're from in the U.S., look at data as to where people in the United States who sign up to join the military are from. Typically, it's from more southern red states. And so when you look at this, and kind of see maybe if we could make some causations from the correlations on the data here. And, this is just predicting, obviously, there was a lot going on. Not only was Trump the less hawkish candidate on foreign policy, he was also the ruder candidate, he was also the male candidate, he was also the orange candidate, he was also the Republican. So I'm sure there are several factors into why Trump did so well in the election, but if you do look at the data, you can see that, maybe one of the things that Trump was saying, which was, I don't think American citizens should be subsidizing the military budget of European countries, and I don't think Americans should be dying for Estonia. Well, maybe that does suggest that whenever the people who are actually putting their lives on the line for the military in these red states and in these states and counties that ended up voting Trump, maybe they like to hear this. Maybe they think to themselves, well, boy, sure, I don't want to die from Estonia and Latvia, and where the hell are they even on the map? And so I'm going to vote for the guy that says I don't have to do that, and that sounds pretty good to me. And I mean, remember, we're entering the 16th, 17th year of the war on terror. Now, I guess 16th, we're in 2017. And this means that a lot of Americans have been really negatively affected by the war on terror at this point. Where, in World War II, we had a lot of, Americans coming back in coffins. In this war, it's been a very slow trickle, but a lot of people have now been affected. Originally, I am from Missouri, now live in Massachusetts, and I could just, from my anecdotal experience of living in both places, when you're from Missouri, you have friends that enlist in the military, you have family members in the military. Everywhere you drive around, everybody has I'm proud of my son who's in the Army, Navy, or whatever, or I support the Navy, or themselves a veteran. I mean, it's just an every single day encounter, several times a day. You just know people in the military, people who are overseas. I remember when, being a younger classman in high school in Missouri and, as being a freshman or a sophomore, hearing of juniors and seniors who graduated and now were in Iraq. And I think even a couple times, like, I knew people who were in, like, mainstream news headlines because of the way they had died or killed somebody in Iraq. So whenever you compare that to my experience in Massachusetts, where it's relatively rare, I'm sure that, I see a veteran sticker maybe once a day on my 30-minute commute to work or so. But very few people I meet tell me they have a relative in the military, a relative that's stationed overseas. I meet very few veterans out here, and that may just be an odd anecdotal thing, but it does seem to me to be a trend. And then when you look at the mapping, you look at the stats as to where active duty military men are from, it's typically from red states. So I guess it would make sense that you would encounter that a lot more in red state. And so when it came to people who were voting, and the people who were most fearful of either losing a loved one to a potential terrorist or, overseas in the Middle East, those people were a lot more likely to vote for Trump. I also think it probably had something to do with the immigration issue and why those people are a little bit more afraid of Muslim people. That's because, their relatives are over fighting Muslim people in the Middle East. Same thing with Syria. Trump was very firm on his stance that the Americans were not going to die for Syrians, and it was just going to be, Hillary Clinton had this crazy plan to get Americans more involved, and Trump wasn't going to do it. He was going to knock the hell out of ISIS, but he wasn't going to get involved. Now, I think this position probably came from more of a uneducated position than anything else. One of the things we have going on right now in Syria is battles between the YPG and the Turks, who are NATO allies. So our two allies are warring in Syria, and this certainly distracts from the U.S.'s overall goal, which is to take as much territory as possible from ISIS and likely the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. However, I don't think Trump considered that he would have to put American Special Operations Forces in between the Turkish and the Kurdish lines to keep them from killing each other. I don't think Trump anticipated that the Turkish or the Kurdish forces would need a lot more U.S. help because half of, a big chunk of their forces, I don't know what percentage of their forces, is dedicated to fighting Turkish-backed Syrian rebels, is dedicated to keeping Turkey from crossing into the Kurdish Afrin enclave, and to keep the Turkish troops at bay along the Turkey-Syrian border. And so all these other implications take effect, and then, Trump's like, looks at the paper and he said, oh, now my goal to knock the hell out of ISIS means I gotta stick a whole bunch of troops in Syria, and he seems to rather break the promise of, not getting more involved than getting more involved in defeating the enemy. Of course, whenever he talked about ISIS, it was always airstrikes. We're gonna knock the hell out of them, talking about the bombs we're gonna drop on them and how we're gonna bomb their families and kill their families. But it was never an argument saying that I'm gonna stick 10,000 U.S. Marines on the ground, I'm going to send 4,000 troops to Afghanistan or anything like this. The specifics were never there. It was always implied that it was some kind of air campaign that was going to be waged. There's never going to be any American troops in harm's way in any of these countries. Afghanistan was the one place where he was a little bit more waffly. I guess his thing was kind of like, we can't lose Afghanistan. For some odd reason, he said this is because Pakistan has nuclear weapons, but the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is very porous, and this is largely because of the U.S. intervention into Afghanistan and even in Waristan in Pakistan. So it definitely seems to me, and so now Trump is announcing a 4,000 more troops to be sent to Afghanistan. This certainly isn't something that he said as a candidate, and so it seems to me that this is another time where Trump maybe left it a little vague as to what he was going to do, but certainly didn't say that he was going to be more hawkish and be like Hillary Clinton. Trump was the dove candidate and was so intentionally. He criticized Hillary Clinton for being too hawkish hawkish. He criticized her past interventionism and wiped his hands clean of it. Trump made the point several times that he did not want to go to war with Libya. He did not want to go to war with Iraq. He didn't want to go to war with Syria. And whether these statements are true or not, the point is that candidate Trump wanted to be less hawkish on all these conflicts. Even looking to Russia, Trump said that he wanted to get along with Putin. And while, certainly looking at this in the whole Russiagate ridiculous narrative that this has gotten in his way of getting along well with Putin, but just like Obama on closing Guantanamo Bay, Trump is president of the United States. If he wants to invite Putin over for dinner, he could invite Putin over for dinner. It's his complete failure that hasn't happened yet, although they will be meeting on Friday. And so this is some good news. Maybe they'll hit it off and get along and figure out a way to, do some like nuclear arms reductions. I mean, remember, Trump as the candidate didn't even really like nuclear weapons that much, but now there's, 15,000 of them in the world. Probably a lot more. I read a recent article that said 15,000, but I think that underestimated Israel by quite a few hundred nukes. Even North Korea, Trump said, if anything, lenient things towards North Korea. Certainly wasn't super hawkish on North Korea. Maybe wanted to say I want to bring to end the resolution or something like that, but definitely wasn't hawkish. And so now we look at Trump 6 months in. Obviously, we got tons of broken campaign promises. We're looking at another surge in Afghanistan of at least 4,000 troops, possibly more. Thousands of American troops in Syria, apparently very close to the front lines in Raqqa, obviously fighting somewhat on the front lines with some of the strikes going on. We had a U.S. F-18 shoot down a Syrian fighter jet, and so how much more on the front lines do you want to be, right? And so this is where we are. And just looking at all that and really showing that Trump was a less hawkish candidate, and looking at that a lot of Americans who lost family members then voted for Trump, maybe it's time to consider that the hawkish stance isn't quite as popular as the mainstream media certainly likes to think, and that our politicians like to think, and the people really want peace. However, every time we elect somebody that says they're going to be less hawkish, they just turn to a complete hawk. I mean, even looking back at George W. Bush in 1999 running against Al Gore, he says, America's not going to be engaged in these campaigns of nation building, and then launches at least two that are, very obvious and clear that Bush really overthrew the governments and tried to rebuild and install a new government in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, Obama said, we're going to get out of these wars. What, are you crazy? This is ridiculous. And then, a huge troop surge in Afghanistan, never closes Guantanamo Bay, opens operations in Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and just really expands everything that George W. Bush was doing. And then Trump again runs on this dovish policy and ends up being a hawk. And I guess, two questions that come out of this, and that is, do people actually care about the anti-war policy? And that is, I think that they do. It's not very high on their priority list. Nobody says my most important issue is anti-war, unless you're one of the, few Americans like myself and probably most people listening to this podcast, realizing just how much the wars cost, and just morally and everything is such a miserable, awful business for everyone involved. And so for those of us who already know, this is great. But for those people who don't, I don't think it's on the top of their priority list to figure out this anti-war thing. And so whenever a president bats up on those promises, well, it matters more if Obama passes Obamacare rather than if he, kills a couple 100,000 civilians across the Middle East. And I guess, the other question is how the hell do they get away with it, and why do they do it? It seems to me like all these presidents, just like the American people, care more about the domestic issues and will either sacrifice the international and foreign policy issues or sell out. It may be a situation where Obama said, well, I really needed to pass Obamacare, so rather than closing Guantanamo Bay, I decided to pass Obamacare. I mean, I think that's a miserable choice, but the choice was Obama's to make in that case. Or it could be that the weapons dealer said that, Mr. Obama, your first speech after you leave the White House will net you $500,000. Now go start a war with Libya. And Obama said, okay, I guess either way is certainly possible. Just looking at, who's profiting off of this? The weapons manufacturers. The United States is selling bombs to everybody around the world and also running themselves out of bombs at the same time. Apparently the U.S. is pretty low low on the laser-guided munitions stockpiles, and they're asking the companies to try to step up operations to be able to make more. So just absolutely what a mess that the country is in now that Trump has been in office for a little less than 6 months, 5 days or 15 days less than 6 months now. It's just absolutely amazing that he could have gone back on so many campaign promises and nobody cares. Even the networks that constantly beat him up and constantly attack him for the most ridiculous things. None of those ridiculous things are ever the anti-war issue. Never breaking his campaign promises about Syria or anything like that. They're just busy picking on him because he said something rude on Twitter, which, feel how you want about that. Being rude on Twitter is one thing. Murdering innocent civilians in foreign countries is another to me. Other news stories I want to talk about. John McCain is making a trip to Afghanistan with some other senators. They were there speaking at the 4th of July. McCain made some points saying that the U.S. needs to win the war in Afghanistan and is trying to rally the troops to win there. I don't know what this old kook is doing. He was doing this 16 years ago, and it still hasn't worked. The Taliban are taking more ground. I don't know what he thinks how many American troops are going to have to die in Afghanistan. I saw today that another American troop died in the Helmand province of Afghanistan. 2 more were injured. And so while it's easy for politicians like John McCain to make a trip overseas and say, rah, 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 let's go get the bad guys, at the end of the day, it means more coffins coming back to the United States instead of young men and women who are really in the absolute prime of their lives and should be benefiting themselves and everybody around them so much, but instead they go overseas to kill and be killed. The UK is looking into the murder of 4 civilians in Afghanistan by a member of the SAS. I believe this occurred in 2011, the alleged incident. I guess the UK gets a lot of these reports. Only like 10% of them ended up being founded that something wrong happened. I think a lot of the times the family members of the civilians are just trying to make sure their dead don't get marked as terrorists, and that the people who are responsible at least have to admit they made a mistake. This was the case of the Yemeni family in the United States, just looking to mark United States, I believe, drone strike that killed their family members as being a crime like it is. I find it interesting that anytime any civilians get killed overseas, it's just like kind of a mistake. Oops, we're sorry. But I don't understand how people get away with this. It's so much more than that. If anybody in your life gets killed unexpectedly, especially somebody young, a child, somebody in their 20s or 30s, it's absolutely horrendous. Whether it's cancer or whether it's, a drunk driving accident or somebody falling off a bridge or committing suicide or what have you, no matter what kind of tragedy it is. Look at what happens if one of your friends dies of cancer. People, go for rallies. They try to raise money to fight cancer and stuff like this. And this can't even happen in the Middle East because if you can't rally for money to try to stop the United States from drone bombing you, that would put you in line with the Taliban and the terrorists, and then you would be liable from drone strike from the United States. And so, there's not any even real recourse for these people except to seek some kind of admission by the foreign governments that killed their innocent family members that their lives mattered to people themselves and the people around them. And it's absolutely shameful that they are nothing more than maybe a tally mark in the United States. And the absolute mess that was Libya that Obama and Hillary created, it looks like Haftar is now close to unifying the second largest city of Benghazi in Libya. I guess there's just a small holdout of Islamists left. Of course, there was a lot of terrorist groups that held a pretty significant foothold in Benghazi after the 2011 war and then the 9/11 terrorist attack where Ambassador Stevens died. General Haftar, I guess, has been trying to clean up the city. I know one of the things that I've read time and time again coming out of Libya is that the people, the civilians, just don't know who to support. There's absolutely no legitimate government. The government that the UN and the US backed was hiding out in Tunisia for a while because they couldn't actually be in Libya without being killed. The Haftar government is cruel and backed by Russia. All of the soldiers rape, kill, and torture people. It's well documented. Like 2/3 of women and children who make it to the EU from Libya say they were raped or sexually assaulted, and half of those rapes or sexual assaults are apparently coming at the hands hands of soldiers, so it's just absolutely horrific. One interesting thing is that it looks like he has made some developments recently on seizing Benghazi. That's General Haftar, and Saif Gaddafi was recently released from a militant jail, and so maybe there are some gains being made because Haftar is seemingly aligned with Gaddafi, and that may give him the kind of legitimacy needed to bring some people over to his side. Want to talk about a story of Newt Gingrich, Rudy Giuliani, and a Saudi prince attending a rally for the MEK. The MEK is a group that's listed as a terrorist organization by Iran. I don't know enough about them to say whether they are or not. It seems like from just the mission statement of the MEK, their goal is to overthrow the current government of Iran. So you have a situation where you have people in the United States, high-level, U.S. politicians, people that are widely listened to and revered, like Rudy Giuliani and Newt Gingrich, and somebody within the Saudi government, a prince, showing up at the rally for this group. And I think even if it isn't a big deal, even if the group isn't a real revolutionary group that can make much damage in the Iranian government, the fact is that to Iran, this looks like it's world nations like the United States and Saudi Arabia giving support to a group it considers its enemy. And anytime somebody gives support to Al-Qaeda or ISIS or anybody America considers its enemy, America will kill those people. Unless, of course, it's the CIA. A few updates I want to get to on Mosul. Apparently, the ISIS fighters remaining, there are about 300 of them left. They control about 0.3 kilometers of a stretch of land between the Tigris and then moving out west in West Mosul. U.S. forces are moving closer to the front lines. I guess the Iraqi soldiers are just completely worn out. They've taken huge losses, and it's just an absolute disaster. So I guess the U.S. troops are picking up some more slack. The Iraqi government declared an end to the caliphate. I don't know. I think they did a few days before, but then they really celebrated 3 years after the caliphate was created. Like I said, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all this jihadism is an ideology. It's terrorism. They're trying to inflict pain on the West for pain inflicted on the Middle East, and it's not going to stop just if ISIS is chased out of Mosul anyways. The UAE calls for the isolation of Qatar. I had updated a few days ago saying that they had gotten an extension till today. I guess depending on when the time zone is, ultimatum kind of came and went without the Qataris making too many concessions, and so the UAE has said they're looking for more sanctions. In Somalia, just more bombings in Mogadishu and more U.S. airstrikes against Al-Shabaab. It's getting worse and worse there. As I outlined last time, there's famine in South Somalia, and it's just a disaster. I read an article saying that they're turning up some evidence for cities in the Idlib province controlled by the Free Syrian Army. Those are the, quote, moderate Syrian rebels backed by the United States, and that they have been running Sharia courts in those cities, and so it just goes to show that even the U.S. moderates aren't very moderate, and a lot of them are just all Al-Qaeda, ISIS anyways. U.S. forces are using advanced artillery in Syria. They're using these, precision-guided artillery munitions. America's big artillery rounds, our artillery cannons can fire artillery at targets from 18 miles away. The regular artillery rounds can hit within a 900-foot radius of the target. So if you fire a round, it may hit 900 feet to the left, 900 feet to the right, or whatever. And so that's a pretty big range to misfire. The new precision-guided shells, I guess, could get within 100 feet of the target, so that sounds a lot better. However, that's still a pretty wide range. That still means that if you're aiming for a house, you could hit your neighbor's house or the house next to that pretty easily. And so it's just always good to remember that while we think the U.S. Army is, releasing, firing all these mortar rounds at ISIS, they're really kind of firing these mortar rounds as somewhat random, and so while you may be aiming at legitimate terrorists, that's not to say that the artillery round doesn't end up a couple houses down in the home of somebody who didn't see it coming. A child could get killed, and then those deaths typically aren't tracked because the only people who are really doing a good job of tracking deaths are groups like the air wars, but they're only able to do it for airstrikes. Peace talks have restarted in Syria. I don't think ISIS is invited, but it is between the the Assad government and Syrian rebel groups. The Assad government said they were going to have a ceasefire just to kind of ease over tensions a little bit in the region. Moving into the peace talks, hopefully good things happen. I guess Assad has been making some public speeches trying to let the people know that the war is coming to an end, but I guess we'll see, kind of what happens with America and getting more and more involved. So that'll be my show for today. I hope everybody liked the show. We'll be back on Friday, hopefully with World Porter, if not with another current events show. If you like the show, please share the show, subscribe to the show on iTunes, and give me a rating and review on iTunes. The website for the show is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. My website is kylesfilesblog.com. I'm on Facebook at Kyle's Files. The private Facebook group is Foreign Policy Focus. The Twitter is at KYAAALE, and my news roundups appear every day at thelibertarianinstitute.org. Thank you everybody so much for listening. I'll see you next time.